One one area of concern I hear from many Israelis, and I'm I'm still not great at giving a response to this, is that they say we'll never be accepted on this land no matter what. That we've tried, no matter how many peace agreements we have, they're rejected and we're met with more terror. They point to what happened in Gaza, where Hamas took over once they had free elections. Once we disengaged and they had free elections. What can we tell Israelis to give them hope that there is a partner for peace amongst the Palestinians? You and I have experienced it through our dialogue, through our experience with Palestinians, but many Israelis do not buy this.
I think it's important to understand that it is extraordinarily difficult for Palestinians to recognize the moral legitimacy of the Jewish people to have a state in this land when that narrative, the Zionist Jewish national narrative, is essentially a denial of their own narrative of their existence as a native people in this land, and narrative of their experience of suffering at the hands of Zionism and the founding of the State of Israel. There's a difference between accepting Israel's moral right to exist, its legitimacy in terms of what we as Jews perceive as our right to be here in this land, and accepting Israel as a country. I like to remind people that, in fact, in 1993, at the time of the signing of the Oslo Agreement, Yasser Arafat did, in fact, recognize the State of Israel and agreed to live in peace with Israel. Israelis, on the other hand, never recognized the Palestinians' right to a state. Never. It's never been recognized by Israel. The two-state solution has never been mandated as an official policy of the government of Israel or the Knesset of Israel. Whereas the Palestinians did recognize Israel, and in fact, when they entered in negotiations, only claimed 22% of the land between the river and the sea, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. They left behind their vision that 100% of the land of Palestine between the river and the sea belongs to them. And the Oslo peace process and the evidence of that in all the negotiations on permanent status between Israel and the Palestinians' demands never exceeded the 22%. They never went back to the claim that we want Haifa, Ramle, Lud, and Akko. They remain that their demands are the 22%. They even compromised on those demands, saying that the Green Line, the pre-1967 borders or the 1949 armistice lines, whatever you want to call them, are not holy. They agreed to the principle of territorial swaps, recognizing the reality on the ground where Israel illegally built settlements in territory that it occupied in 1967. So the Palestinians said, okay, the Green Line is not holy, we will compromise. I'd further say that when we look at the Hamas victory and the disengagement, that it was the Israelis who refused to negotiate the disengagement, the transfer of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, to Mahmoud Abbas, who Ariel Sharon called a chick without feathers, a non-partner, where the Palestinians had established a whole administrative mechanism to take over Gaza in a coordinated way from Israel. Israel decided that it would not negotiate. It was withdrawing unilaterally. And the result of unilateralism is what developed afterwards. Hamas won the narrative. Who got Israel to leave Gaza? Hamas, not Mahmoud Abbas, who was willing to negotiate, who called for peace. It was Hamas who claimed, and the Palestinian street bought it. In addition to Hamas victory being credited to the existing corruption of the Arafat regime that was taken over by Mahmoud Abbas, I know Palestinian Christians who are certainly not Islamic fundamentalists, who voted for Hamas as a protest vote. They just didn't think that Hamas would win. So the vote for Hamas is not an indication of a change of Palestinian attitudes that they have to destroy Israel. I think that the record shows that when we were in a genuine peace process, we were negotiating, there was hope on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian street was behind the peace process. Today, it's a totally different story, because today we just see an entrenchment of the occupation, the expansion of settlements, the talk of annexation, the Trump plan, which is granting 30% of the 22% to Israel gratis without any negotiations, and the creation of a Palestinian state, which looks a lot more like Swiss cheese than anything else, an impossible reality for Palestinians to accept. So it's difficult to convince people they're their partners when they see that reality on the ground.